Hello and welcome to Experiential Learning Lesson 9, Knowing Your Personality. I'm Eloise and I am a lecturer at Boston Media House in Durban. The goal of today's lessons is to differentiate between aptitude, ability, and competence, explore emotional intelligence and its dimensions, practically apply time management techniques, and the theory on emotional intelligence and time stress management to the case of Annie Vechter. Reflect on how to develop and improve your emotional intelligence and time and stress management skills, and lastly, engage in group discussions on emotional intelligence and time and stress management techniques. As a recap of the previous lesson, you're going to tell the class about any active steps that you've taken in developing some of your less prominent professional and transferable skills or towards goal achievement. Remember, the value that they will add in the workplace is directly linked to your skills and abilities. It's never too early to start prioritizing self-improvement. To address that first learning outcome, let's differentiate between aptitude, ability, and competence. Aptitude is a natural ability, and it can be something that you don't really tap into, but you can only really discover your aptitudes once you try something for the first time. An aptitude is something that other people might take a while to master, but it seems to come to you quite easily. And a lot of people use this, they use things like aptitude tests to help them make career choices, so that you are choosing to do something that isn't a daily fight to become better at. And that can really help you feel fulfilled in your career if you have a lot of confidence in your aptitudes. Your abilities are things that you know you can do because you have done them. You may have an aptitude for something, but it cannot become an ability until you engage in it. Whereas some abilities are not based on aptitudes, they're something that you're good at because you've worked really hard over time. Competence. So abilities can be rated according to the degree of competence. Competencies can be personal, as are you accountable, honest, and creative, or behavioral. So do you behave in a competitive, analytical, flexible way? So many of us have heard of IQ, the intelligence quotient, which is it's a number that people assign to your intellect. It is a flawed measure of intelligence, so don't put too much stock in that number. There are many different ways to be intelligent which aren't necessarily measured by tests. But your emotional intelligence is not something that is given to you in a number. It is something that you can be aware of, other people can notice about you without taking any tests. So it is measured. You can measure your own emotional intelligence based on your self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, social skills, and empathy. And in class you will be doing exercises to assess where you fall on those emotional intelligence skills. An extremely important part of self-management is time management. We all have tasks which need to be completed, so that can be at home, at school, or at work. And your ability to manage your time and prioritize tasks and delegate will impact your success. So just like money, time can be spent, invested, and saved. So there are ways that you can enhance your time management, such as through organization. So using tools like calendars and priority lists can help you succeed while avoiding stress. And realistic goal setting will help you organize your time. So by that I mean that if you set up your day and you know what your goals are for the day, then you can give a certain number of hours to each task in achieving those goals, rather than just staying busy with whatever lands on your lap. Procrastination is delaying important tasks until they become urgent, and it is a way to set yourself up for failure and stress. And then once you're stressed, and now you're short on time, and you're going to be struggling to complete those tasks, they're going to be of a lower quality in outcome. So if you plan well, so that you don't end up procrastinating and you have enough time to complete your tasks, that requires you to motivate yourself, which is another part of your emotional intelligence. Is can you motivate yourself to do things that you don't want to do or you don't feel like doing? So there's a tip there. Use tools like calendars and to-do lists to manage your time. They can be paper or digital. Find what works and stick to it. So some of you might have a diary or a paper calendar. Others of you might use a Google Calendar or your Notes app on your phone. It's important that once you make a list, that you actually pay attention to it. You can't just write a to-do list and then forget it exists. But it can be very motivating to write a to-do list, because then once you've ticked things off, you feel accomplished. So there are a few different ways different habits that we pick up, or ways that we waste time. You might be the mañana, so that kind of person thinks about the task but puts it off until tomorrow. So mañana means tomorrow in Spanish. Mañana, mañana, do it tomorrow. And the reason you might do that is because you are anxious that you won't do it well, so you rather put it off to later. So that comes from a place of perfectionism, or it's just boring and you don't feel like it's important enough or interesting enough to spend your time on. Then there is the poor delegator, so somebody who's bad at delegating, wastes a lot of time doing something which somebody else could have done, and what they need to do is communicate better and recognize other people's strengths. Disorganized people believe that they have too much to do, but really it's the disorder that's making them feel overwhelmed, and a disorganized person really needs to use the tools of calendars and to-do lists and prioritizing their to-do list so that they feel like it's manageable by breaking things into smaller steps. A mushroom, they lack certainty about what they're supposed to do, and that's paired with poor communication that stops them from asking what to do, and then they'll waste a lot of time doing something incorrectly or just putting it off until later because they don't know what it is exactly they're supposed to be doing, so they don't do anything. So if you're one of those people, when it comes to your assignments, please speak to your lecturer about exactly what you're supposed to do. You'll notice that most of these time wasters can be cured with communication, organization, and self-motivation. The time management matrix that you see on the screen is an extremely helpful tool for you to categorize tasks that you have to do each day. So you might be wondering what the difference is between urgent and important. So urgent things are things that you need to do now or very, very soon. So if you have an assignment that is due by the end of today, that is urgent. Whereas having a test next month is not as urgent, but they are both important. And it is important for you to note that important things that you do not take care of become urgent. So if you prioritize your assessment and you finish that and you make your deadline, but then you choose to not study for your test, then you're still letting yourself down because that important task is being left to late, and then it will become an urgent task. And there's research that proves that if you are very stressed out, it doesn't help you, because you struggle to remember things when you're stressed out. So please try and set your priorities of what's important and take care of it now. This can mean extremely long term. For instance, your physical health. Right now, you're not seeing the consequences of things like not exercising, not taking care of your teeth, smoking, eating junk instead of nutritious food with fiber. But I promise you, by the time you're in your 40s, those things will become urgent, and you will be spending a lot of money at the dentist, the chiropractor, the physiotherapist, the dietitian, trying to undo the mistakes that you're making in your youth. So it is important for you to take care of your health now, because it will become urgent if you do not. So that's enough about your important and urgent tasks and a little bit of a motivational speech from me. So things that are important but not urgent, we've discussed that. And then you've got the intersection of not important and not urgent. So these are things that they don't really have to be done. And you might feel compelled to watch all of your stories and read all of your emails and things like that. But you don't have to scroll through social media for as many hours as you do per day. There's nothing important waiting for you there. That kind of thing can be put down. You don't have to do Wordle every single day. If you miss it, nothing bad will happen, and you should prioritize other things to spend your time on. So there is a video link there. Please download the slides and do the EQ test on the previous slide and watch this video on this slide so that you can interact with the materials before you come to class. I think the links should also be on your roadmap or your outline for the lesson. So your first activity for today is to make a to-do list for everything personal and college related that you need to do within the next week. And then once you have a complete to-do list, assign it to quadrant number 1, important and urgent tasks, quadrant number 2, urgent, not urgent but important, and those are things you need to plan to do. Then you need to assign some things to the not important but urgent quadrant. And lastly, you're going to assign some things in your to-do list to the not urgent and not important category. In class, you're going to discuss how you can use the decision-making matrix to prioritize your time and think of ways that you can do this in different parts of your life, because we're aware that you're not just at college all day, you've got other important things to do. It's also interesting to consider how many organizations make use of this tool. So here is an interesting classification of the different types of stress. And Seward in 1997, yes, a long time ago, categorized eustress, which is motivating or exciting stress, like your first day at a new job. And I'm sure you've all felt that. If you are an athlete, then you might feel that just before you have a match or a race. And if you are a performer, you might feel that just before you perform. New stress is the way you feel when the stressor does not directly affect you. You may feel this about reports of conflict in faraway countries, and that's definitely something that we all feel right now because of what's happening in Europe and in Israel, Palestine. So if you become aware of these things, there's nothing you can do about it, but it still stresses you out. Distress is negative stress that can harm your health and performance, and it can be divided into acute and chronic stress. So acute means it's short but intense, and that could be triggered by we need to talk or a phone call from a family member, and you assume it's emergency, a family emergency. But once you actually communicate, the stress dissolves because you realize that it wasn't actually a big scary thing to deal with. Then there is chronic stress, and this is not as intense, but it can last for an extended period. So they can be days, weeks, or months. And you can endure this type of stress in the weeks before an exam or a deadline, or during an extended period of interpersonal conflict or friction at home or at work. And this kind of stress is what can mess with all kinds of aspects of your health. It can make you age, it can mess with your digestion, it can make your hair go grey. Chronic stress is detrimental. It contributes to burnout. So definitely needs to be avoided. So here's a tip: identify the cause of your feelings of stress, then plan ways to resolve the trigger. Taking action can relieve stress. So often we put off dealing with stressful situations. Meanwhile, the best thing we can do is to address it as soon as possible so that we can move on with our lives. This is a graphic representation of the difference between what was called basically the different types of stress. So this pressure performance curve is over 100 years old as a concept, but I think it's still relevant and we can all relate. So if you have a look at the far left of that, it says low pressure. So that's called bore out. So you're just bored and you have no motivation to do anything because there's no fire stress, or there's no pressure to ignite your need to do something. And then you move to moderate pressure, and that situation gets you comfortably doing things and then stretching yourself towards optimal performance. And that's where we want to be, just enough stress to get us going and to really feel excited that what we're doing is going to have impact and it's important. And then once that pressure gets too high, we take strain and our performance plummets. It's too stressful, the stakes are too high, we've expended all of our energy and we get burnt out. So burnout happens when you no longer have the the energy or motivation to do anything because you have done too much for too long. So in stress management, the textbook will explain that there are type A personalities and type B personalities. And a type A person, they behave with urgency. They talk fast, they move fast, they eat fast. And once they're working, they really struggle to stop. Because if they do stop working, they feel guilty and they feel like there's an urge pulling them back to getting work done. And they can be quite impatient with other people. And this sense of productivity over everything makes it less likely that these people will be creative, but they are very competitive and they aim for quantity over quality. So get as much done as you possibly can. Then you have type B personalities, and they, instead of moving from a place of urgency, they behave from a place of patience. They work at a steady pace, they're not concerned about deadlines, and they can relax without feeling guilty because they know it's important to take time away from productivity. Their characteristics are that they're patient, creative, focused, and even-tempered. Now, most of us fall somewhere between those two extremes. Sometimes we are urgent and impatient and competitive, and other times, depending on the context and depending on our mood and depending on how much we've got going on, we can relax without guilt and not pay too much attention to deadlines because we know we're going to get it done. Okay, so just think a little bit about where you fall between type A and type B. So in the previous lesson, you worked on the Annie Vector podcast, and now you're going to continue with that by reflecting, illustrate or comment on Annie Vector's emotional intelligence on a flip chart page using markers. And then together, once you've done that reflection, you're going to discuss any elements of emotional intelligence and time and stress management that you can apply to your own lives. And then you can share what was on your flip chart to make sure that your observations are not missed by others. The next lesson is pretty exciting, and it's important that you bring a newspaper or magazine or online article about a well-known leader that you admire. So it has to be somebody who's well-known. It can't be the leader of maybe your church or your school that you went to. It has to be somebody more prominent than that so that other people in the class will have heard the name before. Okay, so bring an online article, and then that's going to be quite an exciting exercise in understanding leadership qualities.